Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the F1 Word podcast, episode number 1. A little bit of a debrief about the Baku Grand Prix, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, if you will. We've got a few of your questions to answer today. And I'm going to be joined by Fergal Walsh from Motorsport Week and Stuart, aka Chainbear, as well. How this is going to work, I'm going to go through 3 topics, probably 2 questions in each one. Obviously, tyres is the big talking point around this weekend, so that's where we're going to start. We're also going to talk about Vettel's form and a bit about safety as well. We'll fly through all of those in around 40 to 60 minutes. But as with any podcast, it is as long as it will need to be. And I've even got some backup questions just in case. But we are going to hop straight into it and say a good morning, although this is going out in the afternoon. So I guess a good whatever to Stuart, a.k.a. Chainbear. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, Sean. Nice to be here in a brand new format.
Yes, good weekend, Baku. Absolutely cracking. I mean, F2, F1, qualify was incredible. Practice had its moments. Brilliant weekend. We want more of that, definitely.
Yeah, it was fun, wasn't it? And a little bit of a, what would you say, sort of a mix-up in the pecking order. I don't think this is a season where we're going to have a very stable form book, is it?
Which is fine. Absolutely fine.
Absolutely.
And also a very good whatever, that's what we're calling it now. And welcome to the F1 Word, Motorsport Week's journalist extraordinaire, Fergal Walsh. Hello, mate. Welcome to the channel.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, my first ever appearance, so happy to be here.
Did you enjoy the weekend? I know you messaged me on Sunday to say it was a bit exhausting.
Yeah, it was. It was something else. It gave us a lot of storylines, a lot of headlines, and yeah, I mean, like you said, it's that unpredictability that is just makes it so exciting. Not only the race, but you know, the race itself had big championship implications. So yeah, just so exciting.
It's actually quite. You say championship implications. It's quite a weird one, isn't it? Because Hamilton and Verstappen are as they were, despite everything that went on. So it's quite crazy that weekend, but it was brilliant. We talked about that in the live stream on Sunday. If you're on YouTube, link on screen now if you want to go and check that one out a little bit later. But let's kick straight into these questions. Thank you to everybody who submitted them on YouTube and on Twitter. We will put a post out after every race weekend. So you guys can throw some questions our way. Question 1 comes from PJ Harwood over on YouTube, over on the YouTubes, says, what should the implications be for Pirelli after this race? 2 tyre failures that could have caused major injury, completely out of the driver and team's control, not even any warning that they were going to blow. First of all, Stuart, massively dangerous, very concerning as well. I know Pirelli have come out and said that initial investigations suspect or suggest it could have been debris rather than something structural or a complete failure there, but really concerning. Do you think there needs to be some kind of action against Pirelli, or is this one of those things where we really do need to wait and make sure that we're not jumping on them too hard, given that it could just have been a bit of debris?
It's tricky, isn't it? And I think we do need to await what hopefully will be some published results of investigations into those tyres. They are saying that the tyres that blew weren't the most stressed corner of the car, and they found some cuts on Hamilton's tyre, which suggests there might be some debris around. And also the fact that there was no warning prior to the tyres giving out suggests that there may have been some damage rather than wear. But having said that, I think what we saw was, I mean, unacceptable is a strong word, but definitely something we don't want to see happening, and something needs to happen to kind of prevent this from happening, even if it was having some system in place to thoroughly check what's going on after Stroll's incident, just to make sure that wasn't something to be expected. Stroll was on the alternate strategy in that first stint, so he was the first person to really push that tyre pretty far. And we did start, after that accident happened, we did start to worry about what would happen to these drivers who started on the softs and moved on to a long medium stint. Luckily, we didn't see anything other than Verstappen's incident, but implications for Pirelli. The problem we've been having is that this isn't the first time we've had races where Pirelli tyres have given out on multiple cars throughout the race, and these are supposed to be stronger structural tyres as well. on the other side of the coin is I think we're going to different shaped tyres next year as well, which will have smaller sidewalls and will hopefully actually be stronger and have less stresses on the where the sidewall meets the tread. So it's a tricky one in balance. I'm hoping. I mean, we're coming to Silverstone soon, which has been a tiebreaker on multiple occasions. So I am hoping Pirelli and the FIA take this seriously in terms of just checking these tyres are suitable. And it's tricky to know what exactly they should be doing about this.
It's difficult without that investigation, isn't it? The findings of that, because I think the reason I say unacceptable is I probably could have worded that better in that it's unacceptable if it transpires that was a structural failure. I mean, Max Verstappen has said that it sort of came out after the race and said, well, of course, Pirelli are going to say it's debris. They don't want to take any responsibility. So there seems to be a breakdown of trust in some ways between the drivers and Pirelli, and maybe that's been coming for a while. Like you say, this isn't the first time we've seen it. A few years ago at Silverstone, lots of tyres were exploding, and somewhere like Silverstone, you've got the Hangar Straight, Baku, that massive straight. It's a massive, massive safety problem, and they've got to investigate this thoroughly, as I'm sure they will, or I hope they will, but I'm sure they will. But it is a massive concern, isn't it, Fergal? Do you think is it just a case of waiting to see what Pirelli uncover with this? Because it could be that it was just a bit of debris that set Stroll off, and then somebody picked up a bit of debris, or Max Verstappen picked up some debris from Stroll's incident. As easy as that.
I mean, it might be. I think Baku it's a street circuit, so the chance for there to be more debris on the track compared to a regular circuit is probably a lot higher, you would think. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to really point any fingers or make any accusations, or at least not too heavy accusations right now, while we don't have the full report from Pirelli. But I mean, either way, it was just a very scary thing, especially where Stroll and Verstappen both had their spins. It was along the straight. There's not much cornering load at that point in the track. There still is load going on the tire because of the high speeds, but it's still extremely dangerous, and was just very scary, because that's one of, or if not the fastest part of any racetrack that the drivers will visit during the year. So and for Verstappen's incident especially, if the car went the other way, he would have been straight into the divider or he could have been into the divider for the pit lane on the track, and that would have been horrendous to look at. I think that happened at the Indy 500 a couple of years ago. So really, really frightening stuff to see. And yeah, obviously this stuff will be taken seriously, because, like you said, it is a huge safety concern. But whatever, F1 doesn't rest on these kind of things. Every incident is taken very seriously, and investigations are done and fixes are put in place to sort this out. But yeah, a tire failure in any respect at that sort of speed is unacceptable, and really, really frightening.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know what the was. Max Verstappen would have been. Was he 200 mile an hour at that point? Because you're coming to the end of the straight, aren't you, by then? So it's a huge accident and a huge amount of damage. I did see one question, actually, not that we're going to bring it up, but somebody asking about who's going to foot the bill for this one. I mean, do the teams still have to pay it? Does that just come under one of those, unfortunately, guys, these things happen in Formula One, that's your bill, or are Pirelli going to have to compensate teams? It'll be interesting to see what comes out after all this, because if it's a bit of debris, then I'd imagine Pirelli will say, well, these things happen, you've got to pay the bill. But if it turns out to be a massive structural failure, then that's not the team's fault. Pirelli might have to pay out, a bit like we saw with George Russell last year in FP1. I think Williams went after compensation, didn't they, from the Baku organisers, because that drain cover came loose, and that's not their fault. So that's something else to keep an eye on. But safety is absolutely paramount in these decisions. And I think that the FIA, for the most part, they do investigate these things thoroughly, and we do generally see changes. The problem is these tyres are locked in now to the end of the year. You can't do what we've seen in the past with concerns and go back to last year's tyres, because they are a different construction, and they were changed because they were concerned about the downforce levels, etc., and tyres failing. So you can't go backwards. So we're stuck with these for the rest of the year. I'm a little bit concerned, Stuart, I'll be honest, that this might make Pirelli change their allocation for the year if I'm going to keep saying if it turns out that there was an issue with the construction, because that means they might go even more cautious, and we might end up with really hard tyres for tracks where you really don't need to, and we end up with effectively teams being able, if they wanted to do a no stop. I know they can't by the rules, but run one set of tyres to the end, and that's going to be detrimental to the racing. So obviously safety first in that aspect, though.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've been thinking about this kind of thing a little bit after those incidents on Sunday, and also how necessary it is to have stints driven by how long the compounds will last, because that's essentially what Pirelli's entire job has been since they turned up, because since they took away refueling, which I still agree with as a sort of general concept, but all of that kind of strategy has shifted away from how light can you run the car to how long can you run the tire, and it's been on Pirelli to provide tires that have a certain lifespan and degrade in a certain way, in order to force teams to implement 1-2 pit stops, and they have been, the last couple of years they've been saying we're trying to get them to move on to 2 pit stops, but in doing that, of course, you force teams to stretch the life of those tires in ways that may cause this kind of thing to happen. Maybe this was debris, but there have been times where the tires have failed, in which case, if we want this kind of thing in general, do we move to a mandatory 2-stop? Do we have mandatory limits on how long you can run a compound at a given track, the way they put mandatory pressures, minimum pressures on the tires to kind of just keep them structurally sound? But also, I'm kind of thinking I'd prefer to just have racing where people can run flat out on their tires, and we don't have to worry about this kind of wear degradation thing, and hopefully having stints where that's not the key part of the stint, I think. So it's sort of more direct answer to your question. I'm kind of hoping if they do move to a sort of harder compounds, more cautious compounds for the rest of the season, I'm hoping that's not detrimental to the racing, because we'll still see good battles between people who are probably going to be on the same tyres anyway, and be able to race each other without having to play silly strategies with Pirelli rubber, if that all makes sense.
Yeah. And kind of, as Fergal said, I don't want to throw around accusations because we don't know. We have no information other than what we're told from Pirelli, but they did up the tyre pressures earlier in the weekend. So I wonder if there was a concern somewhere that they'd seen something in the data somewhere. Oh, it sounds like a daily briefing, something in the data. They've seen something in the data somewhere that says, we need to up these pressures because the curbs are doing this or whatever. But I kind of feel like on past experience or whatever from watching, Pirelli would have said we've had to up the pressures because of this, rather than we've just upped them, if that makes sense. But they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, aren't they, Fergal? Because we as fans want lots of action, tyres that degrade, lots of pit stops, lots of drama, lots of twists and turns. F1 bosses kind of want something similar, maybe not to the extent that some... I know some people who would like to see 4 or 5 pit stops a race, like we used to get sort of not long after Pirelli first came in, but they don't quite want that. They want the entertainment, and then the teams want tyres that will go as long as possible. So Pirelli are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, aren't they, with that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's... I sort of feel a bit sorry for Pirelli because it kind of just feels like they can't really win. Because if we remember, we used to have tyres that, a few years ago, we used to have tyres that degraded quite quickly, and people back then complained that, there was no action because people were trying to, or the drivers were trying to save their tyres, because they were going to be making multiple pit stops in the race anyway. And then when we get these more durable tires, we tried to get more durable tires, but the thing is, teams are just, they've become so good at preserving tire life and extending stints as to reduce the amount of pit stops during a race, which saves them more time on the track and effectively is a faster strategy. It is very difficult to work out that solution because F1 now is so data driven. There's so much information available to the teams through all the practice sessions that they do, and they've been able to gather such a good understanding on how the tires work and how they're able to save the tires. So, I mean, Stuart said there about introducing mandatory pit stops. That's potentially a solution, mandatory 2-stop race. But, I feel like any sort of change you implement in F1, it gets ridiculed by a big portion of people anyway. But I'm glad that I'm not in that position to make these decisions, because it's very tough and it's not easy. And there's definitely, I guess, there's no right solution, because whatever you do, it's going to upset people. And I think, F1 sort of has been going towards a more of a, let's say, entertainment show format over the last couple of years. I mean, we could see that with the sprint races that are being introduced this year. So I think that will come into consideration going forward. And if that's the case, then that might mean having mandatory pit stops in a race, and that could make Pirelli's job a lot easier.
I think the only trouble for me or the only problem with mandatory 2-stoppers, I think you could introduce a mandatory 10-stop race, and there's always going to be one team or one driver that pushes the limits of what the tyres can do to extend a stint, and we could still see tyre blowouts. So I'm not quite so sure if that's. I know a lot of people would love to see mandatory 2-stoppers, but I'm not sure. Yeah, it would spice things up, definitely. But obviously, again, we have to wait for investigations. We'll see what Pirelli say over the next few days, and hopefully we'll hear something before Paul Ricard. They should be pretty swift. I think the tyres have been shipped off to Milan pretty swiftly, because they need to be checked out before we get to Paul Ricard. Can't remember what tyres they are in France, actually. There might be different compounds, but I'll have a look at that a bit later. But make sure you're following. This is just a brilliant plug. Make sure you're following Motorsport Week for all the updates on tyres and all the F1 news and motorsport news, and I'll let you know on the channel as well. But this kind of I wanted to cover this question as well, and this is why I've got a couple of questions for each of these. This came from Findlay on YouTube as well. Said, should F1 have renewed Pirelli's contract, or should they have given Hankook a shot? Obviously, too late really to be talking about should they, because they have, and obviously the pandemic has had its say on that in many ways. But do you think maybe if this is something that does turn out to be not debris and it's an issue with the tyres themselves, and it comes to Pirelli's contract renewal, would you maybe think, Stuart, in the future they could look at someone like a Hankook or maybe a Bridgestone, see if Michelin wants to come back? They've never had any tyre issues at all, Michelin, so why not bring him back in? That was sarcasm, by the way.
I think, although, well, Michelin, the tyres are now going the way Michelin have been asking for years, in that they're going to the low profile thing. So at least they'll be happy. But the thing is, I think, sort of maybe as we've already said, Pirelli have, for the most part, been doing what has been asked of them, and that has occasionally put them in positions where the tyres are being pushed beyond their means. But they have responded to what Formula One and the FIA have asked them to do, be it those early days where they wore out quite quickly to induce more pit stops, or where they had a tyre life profile where there was a cliff and then they brought it back so they would last longer and degrade over a long period. They get asked a lot of things to do, and they tend to do them, and we have had occasional times where there have been failures. But I also think we're not in the era of Formula One which Bridgestone and I guess Michelin, people before them, but there was a particular Bridgestone era where Bridgestone were getting tyre tests, monthly. Ferrari would go take them round Fiorano or whatever and do a whole day's testing just for Bridgestone. Like these days, Pirelli get, or this year particularly, they're getting some testing for these new structure tyres for 2022. But in general, they get that tyre test in Abu Dhabi, and then they just have to learn from winter testing, free practice, and the races and stuff. Their ability to just run these tyres to their death isn't as thorough as in the old days. And I think sometimes we are going to have failures. It's not that they're failing every single race, and I think they do need to make sure they are what I guess you'd call Silverstone safe, when they are like really loaded up. But to be honest, I'm not surprised Pirelli keep getting their contract upgraded, because they do what's asked of them for the most part. And I think, to follow on from kind of what Fergal said, I think this sort of very online sort of with social media kind of having a more direct, more immediate reaction between fans and the sport and stuff, I think this does tend to have an environment where you're seeing a lot of criticism no matter what happens. So, and then we need to be careful to be too reactionary, because I think no matter what we do, whether it's something that's a bit gimmicky or something that's a bit conservative, people are going to go, this is rubbish, I hate it, what are they doing this? And we need to be sure we're making decisions that make the most sense given the information we have and what we want from the sport. So I'm not, I wouldn't be surprised if we get more Pirelli in future, and that Pirelli have continued to be the main supplier.
Yeah, and I mean, imagine if social media had been prominent in 2005 at Indy. Could you imagine the chaos that would cause online? Super quickly before we move on, Fergal, would you like to see a new tyre supply come in to replace Pirelli, or even a return of the tyre war? That'd be a lot of fun. I know expensive, but it could be quite fun for fans.
Yeah, to be honest, it's hard for me to judge or to have a really solid opinion, because it's sort of hard to know what another tire manufacturer would bring to the sport when we haven't seen anything but Pirelli over the last decade or so. And yeah, Pirelli currently have a contract through 2024. The contract, they did 3 years rolling, and then the latest contract was 4 years, I think, because of the introduction of the 2021 tires, or now the 2022 tires, when they wanted to give them time to recoup the losses for the development of those tires. So yeah, Pirelli will be around for another few years anyway. And yeah, I mean, I don't really know what a tire war would bring. I'm not sure fans would really like that, because it would. I think, well, I don't think I'd like that, or at least I wouldn't like to have tires being such a major influence on a potential championship fight. I think that would be quite unfair. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't really see Pirelli leaving F1 anytime soon. I think they have clearly they have a pretty good relationship with Formula One. They're knowledgeable in Formula One, and any sort of incident like this, where there is a failure or there is something that has people talking, there are going to be questions asked about Pirelli, and does F1 need to go a different direction? But I think for the most part, Pirelli, they haven't done a terrible job. As Stuart said, it's not like these tires are failing every single race. There are tire failures, but I think you can't expect everything to be perfect on that end, especially when, well, I'm not blaming the teams, but sometimes if the teams are stretching things, or if Pirelli is makes a mistake in bringing a certain allocation to a race, but is that enough for them to be shown the door in F1? I don't think so. As long as they understand, if they do go wrong and there are failures that are their fault, then if they learn from that, if they put in fixes, then I don't really think there's much of a problem. But at the end of the day, I guess it comes down to the on track excitement, and if the tires can play a part in that, but not such a huge influence on the championship as a whole. But I think for now, sorry, I've gone on a bit of a ramble, but
it's all right.
But I think F1 is fine with Pirelli. Is basically what I'm saying for now, unless things take a dramatic turn and we see a lot more things like this. But people make mistakes all the time, and it's kind of hard to say that, because you're playing with drivers that are going 200 miles an hour down straights. But I think it should be okay. And I don't think there is any need for Pirelli really to be shown the door by F1 just yet. Anyway.
So, rambling and waffling You're going to fit in fantastically here, Fergal. Definitely. And I think ultimately, like I said a couple of times now, we just have to wait for investigations. May turn out that it was debris and it's nothing to do with Pirelli. Might turn out to be 100% their fault. We will find out in the coming weeks. But let's move on. And that does actually move us on quite nicely to safety. And this one comes from at Steckleton over on Twitter, or at Steckleton on F1 over on Twitter. Says this was a pretty poor display again. No safety car with the driver on track. Way too late safety car calls. How can it be that race direction is one of the biggest safety problems in F1 right now? And that is followed up also over on Twitter by at Beta Alpha Male, who says, does Michael Masi need to go? It took a ridiculous amount of time for him to call a safety car after Stroll's and Verstappen's crashes and the countless other things he's messed up in recent years. I feel like we've discussed this quite often, Stuart. Michael Masi, some of his decision making. We've seen things. We saw that at the weekend. Stroll in the middle of the tracks, sort of saying over the radio, red flag, get me out of here. Very dangerous place to leave a car. Charles Leclerc told over team radio by his team, stay to the left on the straight, we're still racing. He comes out and says, this is ridiculous. That's stupid, basically. Why are we still racing when there's a car and a driver at the side of the track and debris everywhere? Why? And then even things like, was it Turkey last year when there was a crane still on track when they restarted Q2 and Michael Masi sort of came out and said, well, hang on a minute, there was a delay in moving the crane, at which point I believe we said at the time, well, then you don't start the session until that crane or tractor or whatever is moved. But it seems crazy that it took so long to get a safety car out when you've got Verstappen at the end of the straight in the wall and Lance Stroll at the start of it.
It wasn't the best, was it? Especially when we spent the first half minute or so kind of worried about what was even going on with the cars that had hit the wall. And it's, like you say, not the first time we've seen what I guess is a bit of a shift in race direction. I think we could sort of say, compared to the Charlie Whiting era, the Michael Masi era seems more, I guess weighted towards keeping the race going, keeping the entertainment going. I wouldn't go as far as to say like there are people in his ear pushing him to do one thing or another, but I think Charlie Whiting would be more cautious and ready to stop a race, suspend a race, delay a session than Michael Masi is. And I think on top of that, I'm still very questioning about moving the safety car line up to the start-finish line, or if the restart line, which after a safety car, the race used to restart sort of basically around the final corner rather than where the start-finish line is, and now it's moved to the start-finish line. Apparently, in terms of clarity for the audience, but what this actually manifests, where there are long straights like Azerbaijan and Mugello, where people kind of the car leading the pack, backing everything up and causing, tricky restart conditions, let's say, as we saw in Mugello. And I think the key thing is, drivers are concerned about their own safety, but they will still do whatever's necessary for their own race, given the conditions they're being told. Like, I think Charles Leclerc said, like, if he's told we're still racing, he will still race, even though he knows he's probably going through debris or something. If they haven't red flagged the race, they'll still go for it. If the safety car line is right down the end of a long straight, they'll back the pack up, even if it may cause an accident. So, because you have to still be competitive, and I think that's where the job of the FIA and the stewards and the race director have to come in, to just be that person that says no, stop, or you can't do this, or we have to suspend the race now. And I think we're basically, I agree, we are seeing a lot, I was going to say cavalier, but cavalier is a very strong accusatory word, but I think we're seeing them be a little less cautious than I would like them to be in this past couple of seasons.
Yeah, I mean, people often say, armchair experts, blah, blah, but of course they're going to say that. You don't know what's going on, sort of us, aimed at people like us, but and fans in general. But anybody sat at home on Sunday that saw Max Verstappen hit that wall instantly knew, safety car. Why did it take so long to deploy that safety car? Because I assume it's a pretty instantaneous thing. I imagine it's hit a switch and let the marshals know and off we go. I can't imagine it takes half a lap to make that decision. And then you've got the red flag which came out, which by the way I think was a brilliant idea because races finishing behind safety cars, it's such an anticlimax. So and we wouldn't have got Mark Webber's scream if we'd have started behind a safety car rather than a red flag. But I think that it just seems like something that needs to be done instantly. It's not like, when a car breaks down at the side of the track and maybe race control sit and think, well, can they get that away with a virtual safety car? Can we leave that at the side with double waved yellows and they can roll it out? It's not one of those incidents. It's the end of a very long, very fast straight. His car's sticking out and the driver's in the car. It just needs to be, surely, a very quick, easy decision, Fergal, just to say that's a safety car quite clearly, because you've got debris everywhere, no fans in the grandstands at the moment, but you've still got marshals everywhere. Some of that flicks up, but you just don't know what's going to happen, do you?
Yeah, I mean, that to me, it seemed pretty obvious at the time that that warrants well, I mean, at the very least, a virtual safety car or safety car. Like you said, I mean, I don't really have too much more to add because you could see that he spun out on the start finish straight. There was debris there. There was his car stranded there. There was no way to move it. Marshals had to get onto the track. So yeah, I mean, I don't know why it took that long. It was fairly obvious that it was a safety car call. And you're right. I feel a bit weird saying, trying to say that this is what race control should have done when I'm sitting in my chair, but it just seemed a bit obvious that it needed a safety car intervention, because it was well, I mean, it doesn't really matter that it was a very high speed part of the track compared to a slower speed a corner or section, because marshals are coming on the track, a car has to be recovered. The driver, Verstappen, has to cross the straight to get back to the pits. So big question marks there, and really not a good look. But hopefully there's lessons to be learned from it. We got away with no major injuries or, I mean, worse this time around, but hopefully something like that doesn't happen again, because that was a bit extreme, especially compared to some other incidents that you've already talked about. That's such a high speed area, so not a good look, but luckily nothing detrimental happened, and we everyone was safe. But for sure, it could have been a lot worse, and I'm really, really happy it wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, some credit to the FIA, testament to them for the safety of these cars, definitely. But maybe it's just me, something just came to me. I feel like we've seen safety cars deployed more quickly for lesser incidents in recent years, which really is quite baffling to me in many ways. But sort of to get to the Beta Alpha Males question over on Twitter, does Michael Masi need to go? It seems really harsh, and I feel a little bit for him in the sense that, and I may well be in a real small minority with that one, I do feel for a bit, because he's not coming in and replacing someone that's done the job for 5 years. He's coming in to replace Charlie Whiting, who died very suddenly and very, very sadly, who has been doing the job for decades, who didn't just do race control, he did so much as well behind the scenes. Charlie Whiting, he I think in order to replace him, they've probably got several other people in to do his jobs, because it was so much for one person, and he was the guy in charge, and with all that experience, he's able to make those calls more quickly. But I'm not making excuses for him, Stuart, at all, Michael Masi. A safety car, when an accident like that happens, it's pretty obvious it needs to be a safety car. But for some of his decision-making, maybe it is just a lack of experience. And we are comparing him to a guy who did the job so brilliantly for so long.
I think it's this is definitely like a trickier question than should they have put a safety car out, that kind of because I mean it is a hard job. He's clearly a different person to Charlie Whiting, and as you say, Charlie Whiting built that job up from nothing and essentially was doing multiple roles that didn't exist as he sort of invented them. And while there does need to be a race director, I think having a team and a committee and people in charge of like different things, I think is more likely what is happening or what needs to happen. So I wouldn't go as far as saying Michael Masi needs to go. I think they just need to maybe keep working, keep improving on the race direction and marshalling systems they have currently, and double check and improve and develop the rules they have with how they react to what's happening on track, which I think, looking over the last couple of decades of the FIA and Formula One and stewarding, I think has been a general positive up curve, and they definitely make decisions that are perhaps unpopular at the time, that I think are on the right side of cautious versus entertainment. So yeah, while I am quite vocally a little bit down on Masi quite often when things like this happen, and I do think he is less cautious than Whiting was, or he and his team. I don't think he's necessarily should be shown the door. I just think maybe they need to rethink what their policy is and improve it, I think. But you might ask someone else and they'll think, I'm glad they're doing more work to keep the show going where they can. So if you know.
Yeah, I get that. And like I say, it goes back to what was said earlier about it being a bit more entertainment these days. Maybe that's, I don't know. I don't really know what the structure is in race control at the moment. Maybe it is, I don't know if you know, Fergal, but maybe it is a case of, Charlie Whiting used to make those decisions as head race director dude. That's his official title, apparently. There you go. And he would have made the calls himself. So maybe if there are 2, 3, 4 people there now making the decisions, perhaps that's making what's making things take a little bit longer to decide. Just a speculative thing there, but just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, we all know, what a great job Charlie Whiting did and what he brought to that role. And that was always going to be tough to fill for Michael Masi, but it's not an easy job by any means. It's a very intense role, a lot of things to manage, and he was brought into that role, like you said, so quickly, so suddenly. He was being slowly warmed into it, but he was really thrust into it over the space of one race weekend. I think for the most part during his first year he did a pretty good job given the circumstances. Definitely did a good enough job that he warranted being, extended in that role, because I think it was, when he started off, it was race weekend to race weekend for the first part, if I remember correctly. And then it was like half a season, and then the second half of the season. And since then he's been in the role, but that's maybe I'm getting that wrong, but I think that's what I remember happened. And yeah, it's not easy at all. It's a lot of pressure, but at the same time, there's no escaping that, and that's the pressure that role sort of brings. And I think you need someone there that's capable of making those decisions. I don't know if anyone can really follow up on what Charlie Whiting did, and he, like you said, held multiple occupations in his role, and he did it so well. And doing his job, definitely not an easy thing, but I think when it comes to the interest of safety, I'm sure the FIA will look at, are the best people in place to deal with those sort of things and make decisions from there, because like I said before earlier in this podcast, safety is priority in everything that they do. So it's something that will be considered, but it's I think he's doing an okay job, but there are certain things that have happened that I guess can't really be ignored. So I mean, we'll see what happens, but I don't want to kick the guy too much, because I certainly won't be able to fulfill that role. It's very, very intense, very, very difficult. But I think if changes are needed going forward, then so be it. I'm sure the FIA will deal with that as they see fit.
Yeah, I certainly couldn't do that role, and I wouldn't want to do that role. It's got to be difficult. I mean, some people might argue, maybe they'll say in the comments after this, that if he can't handle the pressure, then he needs to go, because it's such a high pressure job. They need somebody who can handle that, as you were kind of getting to there, Fergal. But I suppose as well, quite a baptism of fire for him, thrown in at the deep end to take over from Charlie Whiting, and that only got deeper with everything that went on in 2020 as well. So it's not been an easy few years for him. Just forgetting his decision making on track. So that's not an excuse. I'm not making excuses for him, but it's got to have been so tough for him with all the added pressures of the pandemic and all of that. I know a lot of that comes from the big bosses at the FIA, but he will have been involved in some of this sort of at the racetrack, and I just can't imagine how hard the job is anyway. But with all of that added stuff on top of it, and some ridiculously huge shoes to fill, yeah, I personally, when I see these decisions, my knee-jerk reaction, because I am very reactionary, it takes me maybe a couple of days to sit down and look at everything and think about it. But my reaction at the time is he's got to go. But then you look at everything and the decisions he's having to make on the fly. It's not easy, and we do need to maybe cut him a little bit of slack. But there is going to come a point where, inevitably, if this continues, the FIA are going to have to say, this isn't working, Michael. We're going to have to bring somebody else in. It's inevitable if it continues to happen. But as always, and as with the tyres, I suppose, we shall see. Watch this space is apparently my new catchphrase, but there you go. We will roll on, because we're going to sort of move away from safety and tyres and onto something I think is a really nice, positive discussion. I'm quite looking forward to this one. Sebastian Vettel. Fabulous weekend in Monaco, incredible weekend in Baku. Raven Blackwood over on the YouTubes says, is the old Vettel finally back, or is this just a good but temporary run he's having? And that is followed up as well. Thank you very much, Raven. Followed up by, I'm going to ruin this name, and I'm just going to call you Kian, and if it's wrong, please do let me know in the comments, because I'm not going to attempt to butcher that one. Do you believe that Vettel is comfortable in the Aston Martin yet, and if we should expect more podiums? Fantastic weekend. Nobody's denying that for a second, Stuart, in Monaco. 5th place it turned out, and then this weekend, absolutely brilliant as well. 11th place in qualifying, maybe not fantastic, but another driver that was caught out by all the chaos of qualifying. But to turn that into a podium, and I said on Sunday, a lot of people will say him and Gasly were so lucky at everything that happened ahead of them, but I don't necessarily agree with that. Yes, the argument is that they've looked into the podium because of Verstappen's retirement and Hamilton's problems, but they were both, Gasly and Vettel, right in the mix with those leaders for most of that race before the chaos really kicked off. I think Vettel was superb and completely deserved driver of the day on Sunday. I don't always agree with the public vote when it comes to driver of the day, but I thought spot on decision.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely calling him driver of the day, 3/4 of the way through that race. He had a wonderful drive. We've definitely seen an uptick in form in the last 2 races. I think there's a couple of things going on here. I think we've discussed in the past few races this season how a lot of the drivers who move teams seem to just struggle to get to grips with their new car and things, and it seemed to be taking them a few races, and they were underperforming how expected. I mean, Perez among them, Ricardo, and Vettel as well. Vettel, of course, had that big question mark over him because of his sort of downturn in performance at Ferrari, where we're expecting him to have more wins, have more podiums. I know last year was a dreadful for that team. But now, last couple of races, including Vettel, we are seeing an active performance from those people. On the one hand, they're quite different tracks than the ones we've had before. They are, street circuits. Monaco in particular is a funny little track. But Vettel was really made it work for him, and he felt comfortable in Monaco. He put in some blinding laps around the pit stop phase to jump Hamilton and gain more positions than he was given by, like Leclerc being demoted to the back of the grid and so on. And in Baku, he went much longer on those soft tyres, which not only allowed him to do more overcuts, but kept him on fresher mediums against the cars around him, which he was able to capitalize on. He didn't sort of just languish, and he was helped a bit by some retirements around him, but some drivers might not have made that work. A lot of drivers would not have got that Aston, I need to say Racing Point, that Aston Martin to second place or held it on the restart like that. So yeah, very impressive. I'm really hoping this marks, this isn't sort of a street track special, and as soon as they go back to sort of high downforce, faster tracks, we see a dip again. But he seems happy and confident, and part of getting performance out of the car is being in the right mindset. And I think, I'm very happy for him, and I don't think these last two races have just been a sort of gift of luck and strategy. I think he really made it work, and it's been a pleasure to see actually after the couple of years he's had.
Yeah, I mean, he's been smiling pretty much consistently since he got to Aston, but he was beaming on Sunday, wasn't he? He was after Monaco, and a great point on the pit stops there in Monaco. His laps around those stops were so quick. He just absolutely delivered when he needed to. That's an experience thing, I think, as well, and confidence in having the car. I mean, he was comfortable in that car from practice, so probably shouldn't have been surprised in Monaco, but again, great point on the tyres, Stuart. Longest stint on the mediums on Sunday was 13 laps by Kimi Raikkonen. Sebastian Vettel took the softs, 18 laps. We're talking about these. I know hard tyres, the longest stint was 41 laps. It's not really a comparison in that regard, but we're talking about these potential structural problems with the tyres, but then Vettel can take a set of softs around that track under certain loads 5 laps longer than a harder compound. So, big question marks all over the Pirelli thing this weekend, but he's been good, hasn't he, Fergal? And I know it's been difficult first few races. There were updates to the car, I think, for Monaco to the floor, I believe. So maybe that's something that's helped his driving style. But also, and Stuart said there about street circuits, it's often, I find in the years I've been watching, tracks like Monaco, Baku, difficult circuits, they really tend to reward experience, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're the most challenging circuits out there when the walls are just millimeters away from where you're placing your car. I mean, it was just a great. It's been a great couple of weeks or a couple of race weekends by Vettel, and really capped off with a podium in Baku. I mean, it's nice to see. And like Stuart said, the psychological arrangement in that is very important as well. I think, he did suffer quite a bit in the last couple of years at Ferrari, especially when Charles came in and sort of made it clear that he was the future of the team, and he sort of, formed into that lead driver role, if you want to call it that. Now at Aston Martin, it was a couple of tough first races. The car wasn't quite as quick as they thought it would be, especially compared to where Racing Point were last year. But he stuck with it. In Monaco, it was great, a great stint, opening stint that allowed him to jump a couple of cars, and then the same again here. I mean, he was in the lead of the race for a bit, and had some really, really strong pace. And I mean, maybe he did luck, you could say, into the podium result because of Verstappen and Hamilton's mishaps, but at the same time, that doesn't take away from what he achieved and the drive that he did, because it would have been a strong result anyway. But drivers look into podiums all the time, so it doesn't really make a difference. You're not in control of what happens to other drivers, so you got to be there to take the opportunities. So it was good to see, really, really good to see. Nicely deserved, well deserved as well for the Aston Martin team. Historically that team has always been the team that achieves a lot with so little. Maybe now they have a little bit more investment, probably the most investment they've ever had in that team's history, but that will take a few years to really show where they can be. But it's a good start to I guess that era for Aston Martin, especially after the first couple of dodgy races. To get a podium is really confidence boosting, especially for Vettel, because we've seen as well that the teams that are the drivers that swap teams or returning drivers seem to struggle a little bit. And Vettel now to get a podium with his new team is something that he was really, really tough to achieve with Ferrari last year. I mean, now he's only something like 5 points away from his entire tally that he achieved for Ferrari last year, his entire points tally. So, yeah, a really strong start, and really, really happy for him. It's like that saying that everyone used to have. If everyone's a Ferrari fan, I think that's sort of evolved now into everyone's a Sebastian Vettel fan.
It feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's he's a very humble guy. He's very aware, and he's had a tough time, but hopefully this Aston Martin partnership will be something very good for him, and to get a podium this early on, I'm sure will only serve him and the team well going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I on the luck thing, I'm going to use my usual line. Yes, perhaps look for that podium, but you've got to be in that position to capitalise on the luck when it falls your way. Blah, 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 blah. Spent 4 years saying that nearly. Anyway, but just in terms of sort of, you've said there about his points tally, that brings him sort of into plays in the top 10 now. He's actually ahead of Stroll. I would say Stroll had the better first 4 races out of the 2, to be fair. So I know Stroll had his DNF at the weekend, but it's good to see him jump into that top 10. But what it's done for Aston Martin, I think they've actually lost a position, unless I'm wrong, because AlphaTauri, obviously Gasly third and Tsunoda scored as well, so they've actually dropped a place, but they're only a couple of points behind AlphaTauri. McLaren are in 4th on 92, Ferrari are 3rd in 94 on 94 points. Even if this is the start of Vettel sort of turning things around, it's a big ask. I know we're having a very chaotic season and we're getting lots of surprises and lots of excitement and drama, but it seems like even at this early stage for Aston Martin to overturn the advantage that Ferrari and McLaren have already, just to reiterate, Ferrari 94, McLaren 92, Aston Martin 37, it seems like quite an uphill struggle unless that car does get to Racing Point 2020 levels of competitiveness. Do you think the battle really now, Stuart, for Aston is 5th place? Has that got to be their target now, minimum this season?
I think so. I think, the way the Constructors are shaken out over the first 6 races, it looks like we've got 4 tiers. You've got that clear Red Bull Mercedes battle at the top, and then Ferrari and McLaren very close. That's going to be really exciting to watch. 3rd tier, AlphaTauri, Aston, Alpine, all pretty close to each other. I'm interested to see if Alpine can sort of be a bit more consistent with that. And then obviously the Alfa Romeo, Haas, Williams at the bottom. So I think realistically, Aston Martin are going to be focusing on that battle for 5th with AlphaTauri and Alpine. I think they'd be disappointed if they didn't get 5th, if they couldn't, take that. And I think they'd probably hope to take it quite comfortably, but at least to just clinch it by the end. I think they know where they are this season. I think they are probably more likely thinking, right, our all-out assault will be next year. This is definitely going to be some kind of transition year for us. We're not where we want to be, and I think dragging ourselves up to that Ferrari-McLaren battle is a bit too much, as you say.
I mean, if the last 18 months has taught us anything, it's you can never write anything off, can you? It's been such a chaotic year with Formula One in general. So just because they are where they are right now, I'm not saying that they can't finish 3rd, and there are still plenty of points on the table. I just think Ferrari look good, McLaren look good. They're not going to just suddenly fall away, I wouldn't expect. So it's going to need Aston to really pull something out to claw that gap back. But we'll see. But just to go back to Sebastian Vettel quickly, Fergal, just kind of... I guess to answer the question really that was put forward, I don't want to be skeptical. I feel like this is more track specific because, particularly Monaco is the great leveler, as they like to call it. So, and like I say, experience could be so important there. But I do think this might be track specific, and we'll see in Paul Ricard. I could be completely wrong. And honestly, I hope I am. Do I want Sebastian Vettel and Aston Martin up there fighting with McLaren and Ferrari for the odd podium when the others trip up? Absolutely. Of course I do. But do we think it's probably more track specific than that car suddenly, what feels like overnight, just turning around?
Yeah, well, I think definitely they started the year, a bit behind the likes of Ferrari and McLaren, and to pull that back will be very difficult, especially as the season goes on, when teams start to put their full focus on the 2022 car if they haven't already. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly where they are come France and so on. But yeah, I think so far in the early stages of the season still does suggest that it's Ferrari and McLaren that are battling for P3, and that battle behind is very much between Aston Martin, Alpine, and AlphaTauri, all the A's. So yeah, it's. I mean, I don't think P5 would be a bad result for Aston Martin, but I think it would, because it's so tight, it's going to be very, very difficult to achieve. But they've got a decent lineup, especially if Vettel can really pull back to where he was a couple of years ago, really pull out those performances again. Maybe it'll be a little bit tougher for him because he'll be racing in the midfield compared to at the front where we've seen him thrive before. And Stroll, we know Stroll has speed. He's shown that plenty of times before. And if he can get that consistency in there, it'll be a very, very solid lineup that will aid their fight, which I personally do think is for P5 in the championship. But yeah, it'll be tough. But yeah, intrigued to see what happens. And if it's that tight, then it would be very, very exciting to see if it would actually be the driver rather than the car and the whole team. I know the team plays a big role, but it would make it a lot more exciting if it came down to the on-track qualifying and race speed of the individual drivers. Yeah, that would make it a lot more exciting. But yeah, we'll see how it goes.
It's been a great start to the season. Whatever happens from here on in, I think it's going to be brilliant this year. We've got a couple of minutes. So I'm going to throw some speedy questions at you. Let's see if you can answer them in as few words as possible. We all love a good waffle, so this could be interesting. Could still be here in a week. I'll do one each. So I'll come to you first, Fergal, seeing as we were kind of chatting there. It's not really answering a question, but Valtteri Bottas, shocking weekend, long way off in the championship now. Super quickly, is he out of the running this year? Is he going to be a Barrichello 2.0, if you like, and just be Mercedes number 2?
How do I answer this in as short as possible? I think, yeah, I mean, I think so. Well, I don't think he's in contention for the title. He hasn't been over the last couple of years, and it's been a pretty disastrous start to his year. Not always his fault, but it's been tough, and I think especially as the season goes on, it's going to be if Verstappen and Hamilton are very, very close to each other, it'll be, I guess, up to him to help Hamilton out in that championship once again, which is a shame for him. But certainly, if it keeps going like this, yeah, he won't be in championship contention, I think.
50 Alarum wants to know, Stuart, after 6 races, which driver has shown the most positive improvement, or who has impressed you the most from the drivers switching teams? So your rookies and that includes Alonso, as that hot young driver we all know him as.
Oh, good question. I mean, at the moment, it does kind of look like Vettel, doesn't it? But we're stuck in this tricky little section where we've just had a couple of slightly different street tracks, and I'm like, is this a flattering to deceive thing? Obviously, very, very happy for Perez, and it's a nice segue to the last question. I think, obviously, Hamilton Verstappen is the battle this season, but Bottas needs to be where Perez is right now, picking up pieces where possible. So yeah, I think it's between Vettel and Perez for me.
Awesome, and I'll answer this one. Catching on YouTube, what is your take on deciding on a red flag with only 5 to go? Should the FIA not have let the race continue to a natural end under the safety car? Catching found it quite gimmicky to restart the race with only 2 to go. I kind of touched on it earlier. I think the red flag from an entertainment perspective was the right thing to do. You probably could have covered it under safety car, but that kind of brings what was a brilliant race to an anticlimax, and I kind of get why the FIA and the stewards decided they wanted to red flag that, so I do agree. I think it was right to red flag it. I think as well, most importantly on safety grounds, yes, the safety car was out, but cars are still moving pretty swiftly under that safety car. Even a tyre blowout under the safety car, the field bunched up, could cause not as big a collision as Verstappen and Stroll had, but certainly could have easily caused a collision that would have caused even more chaos. So I think the red flag was the right call on safety and from an entertainment perspective, which we've talked about already. But I think we're going to wrap it up there for this one. I kept to time. Wow, it's a miracle.
I am shocked.
It's a miracle.
Shocked.
Thank you very much, Fergal, for popping on, mate. It was great to talk to you. Finally, we've been chatting on and off for 2 or 3 years now, so it was great to finally sit down and chat super quickly. Are you looking forward to Paul Ricard? It's so exciting, isn't it?
I'll just say yes. It's just easier to say yes. I mean, I look forward to any F1 race, regardless of the track. So yeah, yes, I am looking forward to it.
I like it. Very diplomatic. And thank you as well, Stuart. As always, yeah, Paul Ricard next. It is what it is. But it's been one of those seasons. It could be the best race of the year for all we know, and Sochi might follow us even better. Who knows?
We are due a good one in Paul Ricard. And to be honest, with the championship shaping up as it is, I think every race is quite exciting to me.
Absolutely. I can't wait for that one. But we are going to wrap it up there, like I say. Thank you to both of you coming on. Thank you to you guys for listening as well. If you're watching on YouTube, you can listen over on Spotify and on SoundCloud. And if you're listening on Spotify and SoundCloud, you can listen over on YouTube as well. So please do subscribe if you're new on YouTube. Don't forget to drop a like as well. I think you can like on SoundCloud and make sure you're following for future podcast episodes. Like I said, we'll try and do one of these after every race weekend. Just a great way to kind of sit and chat with you all. I will be back. When will I be back? Probably Thursday with another video. There'll be a news roundabout this weekend as well, and then we've got 3 races back to back: France, Styria and Austria, all being well, fingers crossed. So lots to come over the next few days, weeks and months. The summer break is cruising up to us. That's not far away, but we'll wrap it up there. Links to social media in the description as well. Like I said, don't forget to subscribe and drop a like as well. I'll do my sign out. I'll breathe first though. Thank you for watching. I've been sure this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.